the #1 cause of death in the United States is heart disease. But it doesn't have to be, because at least 70 to 90% of cardiac events are preventable by eating the right foods on the right schedule and by exercising the right way.
The Inter-Heart study showed that for men and women, old and young, in all areas of the world, 9 potentially modifiable factors like diet, exercise, and smoking accounted for more than 90% of the proportion of the risk of having a heart attack, and this has been confirmed in prospective studies. Follow men over time, and those making healthy lifestyle choices associated with a 90% drop in risk. Same with women, 92% of the risk gone. Same with diabetes. 91% of cases could be attributed to bad habits and behaviors. And the same healthy lifestyle, which includes not smoking, eating a healthy diet, exercising, maintaining an optimal body weight, may reduce the risk of multiple chronic diseases at the same time, not just heart disease and diabetes, but stroke as well. Up to 80% of strokes avoidable with simple lifestyle changes.
Heart disease and many other chronic health problems are preventable through lifestyle. Food is medicine, and we can protect our hearts. That is, if we fix the right problem, if we solve for root cause. What is the root cause? Cholesterol? There's no question. High cholesterol is a symptom of heart disease. No one disputes that. However, it's not a very good predictor of heart disease, because cholesterol is not the root cause. The vast majority of clogged arteries, high blood pressure, even heart attacks, are actually caused by hyperinsulinemia, by insulin resistance. It's the chronic and persistent levels of insulin, not cholesterol and not blood glucose, that best predict a person's true cardiovascular risk.
When they did the multivariate analysis, and this is not too complicated, all they do is mathematically go through all the factors and find out, well, which ones are dependent on other ones, and which ones are truly independent, more causal. They just do an analysis to find out which are the spurious or misleading ones. And what they found in this study with second heart attacks is that total cholesterol and LDL kind of fell out. They were a 1x, or in other words, they did not connect to the following heart attack. Now, insulin, which we're going to talk about a bit, your levels of your blood insulin, which is hugely meaningful. What multiplier of risk do you think there was in the insulin measurements they did? 3x? It'd be higher? Maybe a bit higher? 6.7x. So it basically romped home, and the summary from this, I think it was a Colombian team, the summary was basically that we may be grossly, massively underestimating the importance of insulin and insulin resistance in protecting people from second heart attacks. And they're entirely correct.
This is Ivor Cummins. He's brilliant. His work, and that of dozens of medical doctors who treat heart disease every day, is finally uncovering the root cause of heart disease, and so many other chronic health problems too.
Here's another one, and this is to illustrate it's not just heart disease. Insulin, hyperinsulin, and insulin resistance are massive in heart disease, but it's much broader. This hyperinsulinic syndrome, this crowd got 423 papers, studies with humans, and they pulled out the ones that actually measured insulin, because the metabolic syndrome is actually the insulin resistance syndrome. But amazingly, for decades, they haven't been measuring insulin. They're measuring indirect markers like blood glucose and cholesterol and other things. So these guys pulled out the papers that had insulin. So how did insulin relate to the myriad diseases you're about to see? Diseases of modernity, right? So in other words, how did insulin track with people who had the disease were higher in insulin, i.e. insulin was important? And the reality is, in nearly every study, insulin stood out. And I'll let you read those diseases. Because hyperinsulinemia and insulin resistance is indicative of having type 2 diabetic dysfunction in your body. And that is a model of accelerated aging. Type 2 diabetes is a multifaceted metabolic car crash. And I'll show you shortly how many people have it, right? So all the studies practically that measured insulin, it lined up with the people who had the disease were higher in insulin, and doesn't surprise me in the least.
Cardiovascular disease, diabetes, obesity, hypertension, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, renal failure, dyslipidemia, metabolic syndrome, and even certain cancers. Wow. Hyperinsulinemia, too much insulin production, drives metabolic dysfunction, and poor metabolic health creates chronic disease. It's almost that simple. And over half the people you know are insulin resistant today.
Paper last year, over 50% it looks like of adult Americans are now pre-diabetic or diabetic. And pre-diabetic, diabetic, insulin resistant, hyperinsulinemic, to an engineer these are all the same spectrum, right? Over half of Americans essentially have diabetic dysfunction, which is kind of interesting, like wow, over half your population have a specific dysfunction? That's kind of beyond epidemic, right? And if you used Kraft's test, which is far more sensitive, probably over 65% of adult Americans have a level of diabetic dysfunction. Dr. Gerber reckons it's probably above 70% from his patients. He's getting people coming in the door who are apparently non-diabetics from other doctors. He's measuring them in this way and their insulin's through the roof.
I know, this sounds like terrible news, and it is, but there is a bright side here. Because if so many of the worst chronic diseases we face today are in fact caused by insulin resistance, we can fight back. Because insulin resistance is treatable. It's reversible. Schedule a trip to the doctor to get your heart checked. And while you're there, consider a Kraft insulin test and insist on a 5-minute calcium scan because a person's CAC score is the single best indicator of heart health by far.